My name is Saskia. I'm 36 years old. And the night I was seated in my parents' garage, I sent one email that my father would spend the next 6 months trying to undo. He called me at 6 o'clock in the morning crying. He did not cry when I graduated at the top of my class. He did not cry at any of the 3 promotions I received in 4 years. He did not cry when I quietly signed documents that kept his company solvent at a moment when the bank was 3 weeks from calling in the loans. He cried when the bank called him. That is the shape of this story. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories, where the people who put you at the folding table eventually learn what you are worth at the real one. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight. Subscribe before we go any further. Now, let me take you back. I am a financial risk consultant. I spend my professional life walking into companies that are in trouble and identifying exactly where the structure failed and what it would take to keep the failure from becoming permanent. I am good at this work. I am good at it because I grew up in a house where the structure was always slightly precarious, and I learned early to read the signs before the signs became problems. My family called this trait difficult. They meant it as a criticism. It turned out to be a career. I built my consultancy from one client and a home office with a second-hand desk to a 12-person firm with contracts across 3 industries. I did it without startup capital from my parents, without introductions from my father's business contacts, without any of the infrastructure that my older brother Tristan had been handed when he joined my father's commercial interiors company at 24, with a title, a company car, and an expense account, and the specific confidence of a man who had never been required to earn either. Tristan is 39 now. He has my father's handshake and my mother's capacity for a room. He fills spaces with the ease of someone who has always been told the space was his. My father talks about him at family dinners, the way people talk about achievements they are claiming credit for. My son graduated from Leeds, my father says, as though the graduation was something that happened to the family rather than something Tristan did himself. My sister Fenella is 33. She is the youngest and has the quality of someone who has always been the ending of every sentence, the one the family lands on when they have finished describing everything else. She is warm and socially fluent and has never had to develop the particular discipline that comes from being the one nobody is landing on. My mother's name is Lavinia, 64. She built the image of the family the way she built everything, through sustained attention to surfaces and a talent for curating the version of things that looked best from the outside. She loved her children in the way she managed everything, selectively, with the greatest investment directed toward the highest visible return. I was not a visible return. I was infrastructure. My father's name is Alistair, 67. He built Vance Interiors from a one-van operation into a mid-sized commercial interiors firm with 14 employees and a client list that included 3 hotel chains and a regional NHS healthcare trust. He built it over 30 years with genuine skill and the stubborn energy of a man who had something to prove to the working-class neighborhood he grew up in. He is not a dishonest man. He is a man who made a quiet arrangement with himself somewhere in his 50s that the version of the family he presented to the world was more important than the accuracy of it. I had spent 36 years being the part of the version that did not fit the presentation. The anniversary party was at the Clifton Club, not the golf club, though my parents had been members for 11 years and had considered it. My mother had decided the golf club was too formal for the occasion, and had chosen instead a private event space attached to a restaurant my father's company had done the interiors for, which meant the room had Alistair Vance's professional fingerprints on every surface, and he could stand in it and feel that the setting was a form of credit. It held 120 people. They had invited 114. I know this because I had seen the guest list when my mother called me in March to ask whether I could confirm my attendance. She had read through the names with the particular pride of someone presenting evidence of their social standing, and I had listened and noted the names and observed that the list included every member of the extended family, every significant business relationship my father had maintained for 30 years, and several neighbors whose primary function in my parents' social architecture was to be impressed. I had confirmed my attendance. I had bought a gift, a framed set of photographs spanning 40 years of their marriage, selected from the albums my mother kept and reproduced on archival paper by a print studio I used for client presentations. It took 4 evenings to assemble. I had wrapped it myself. I drove to the Clifton Club on a Saturday in September and arrived at 7, which was the time listed on the invitation, which was the time I always arrived because arriving on time was a form of respect I had been taught to extend to other people, regardless of whether it was extended back. The car park was full. I carried the gift through the entrance and into the venue, and the first thing I noticed was the warmth of a room that had been running for a while. The kind of warmth that accumulates when 100 people have been eating and drinking and talking for longer than the invitation suggested. I looked at the time. It was 3 minutes past 7. The room had the settled quality of an event that had been underway for at least an hour. I found my mother near the centerpiece table. She was wearing the dress she had mentioned in March, deep blue, the one she had bought specifically for the photographs. She looked the way she always looked at occasions she had prepared for, polished and present and slightly performing. She turned when I touched her arm. She said, "Saskia, you made it." The phrasing landed the way it landed, not, "You're here," not, "I'm so glad you came, you made it." As though my arrival had been in question rather than confirmed 3 months earlier in a phone call during which she had read me 114 names, I said, "Of course, happy anniversary." She looked at the gift under my arm. She said, "Oh, lovely. Put it with the others." She pointed towards a table near the entrance where gifts had been stacked. I set the gift down. I looked around the room for my place card. There were round tables of 8, each set with white linen and the gold-toned centerpieces my mother had described in the planning details she had shared with me in August, asking my opinion on the floral arrangement and then choosing a different one. Each table had place cards in small silver holders. I moved through the room, reading them. Table 1. Alistair and Lavinia at the center with the immediate family. I found Tristan's name at table 1, his wife beside him, their 2 children at the adjacent table arranged next to my mother's sister and her family. I found Fenella's name at table 1, her partner beside her. I moved through table 2, table 3, the business associates, the long-term friends, and the neighbors who were there to be impressed. I moved through the overflow tables near the windows where the younger cousins had been placed. My name was not on any of them. I stood in the middle of a room containing 114 people who had all been assigned a seat and looked at the space around me, the way I looked at a set of financial records when a number that should be present is absent. I found my mother again. I said, "I cannot find my place card." She said, "Oh." She said it with the quality of something that had been known and had not been addressed rather than something that had been overlooked. "The house is full," she said. She said the house was full, about a commercial event space that held 120 people and had 114 guests. She said, "We set something up for you in the side area." She said side area with the smoothness of a prepared description. She walked me through a door at the back of the main room, down a short corridor, and into the converted space attached to the venue, the garage. Not a metaphor, an actual converted garage with epoxy floors and fluorescent lighting and the ambient smell of a space that had been cleaned but not transformed. There was a folding table against the wall, a plastic chair, a paper plate, a glass that had already been filled with water by someone who had set this up in advance. Someone had set this up in advance. I looked at the setup. I looked at the door behind me through which the sounds of the party were audible. I looked at my mother. She said, "It's just for the overflow. It happens at these things." There was no other overflow. There was one chair in one place setting, and the word overflow implied a group of people, and the group was me. I said, "Okay." She went back through the door. I sat down. The chair was the plastic folding kind with metal legs that press against the back of your thighs if you sit still long enough. The table was unsteady, the kind that requires a folded napkin under one leg to stop the rocking. I sat there and I listened to the sounds coming through the door. The string quartet I could hear but not see. The laughter from 114 people with places at the real tables. The toast my father would be giving at some point to 40 years of a marriage that had produced 3 children, one of whom was currently sitting next to a paper plate in a converted garage. Tristan came through the door at 7:45. He looked at the setup. He said, "What's going on in here?" I said, "The house was full." He said, "It's a 6,000 square foot event space." I said, "I know." He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who has understood something and has decided that understanding it is less comfortable than not understanding it. He said, "Come sit at our table." I said, "I am fine here." He said, "Saskia." I said, "Tristan, I am fine here." He went back through the door. Fenella came through at 8:15. She looked at the table and the chair and said, "Don't make everything about yourself." She went back through the door. I sat in the garage for 40 minutes. I watched my father through the small window in the door as he stood at the front of the room with a microphone and described the family he had built. He spoke about Tristan's professional achievements. He spoke about Fenella's warmth. He spoke about Lavinia with the love of a man who had built his public self around her approval. He did not say my name, not once. I was 40 feet away and I was not in the sentence. I reached into my bag. I took out my phone. I opened my email. The draft had been sitting in my outbox for 6 weeks. Not because I had been planning this moment, but because I had drafted it in a different context after a different conversation and had not sent it because I had been giving the situation more time. I had given the situation enough time. I read the draft. I made one small adjustment to the date language in the second paragraph. I sent it. I finished my drink. I left the gift on the table with the others, and I walked out through the side door and got in my car and drove home. At the time, nobody turned from the room to notice I had gone. By sunrise, the email was the only thing anyone was talking about. I slept well that night. Not the sleep of someone who has done something impulsive and is running from the weight of it. The sleep of someone who has made a decision that required no further processing because the processing had already been done over a long period before the moment of execution. I had sent the email at 13 minutes to 9 on a Saturday evening. I was asleep by 10:30. My phone started at 4 minutes past 6 in the morning, my father's name on the screen. I looked at it for 2 rings, not from hesitation, but from the practiced habit of someone who reads the full document before responding to the first line. I answered on the 3rd ring. He was crying, not the controlled emotional expression of a man delivering a difficult message, but the unstructured crying of someone whose situation has arrived at a point his prepared responses cannot address. I had heard my father cry twice in my life. Once at his own father's funeral when I was 11. Once when Tristan's son was born premature and spent 9 days in the neonatal unit before coming home healthy. Both times the crying had been about something he loved. This time it was about something he needed. He said, "The bank called." I said, "I expected they would." He said, "They said your guarantee withdrawal notification came through this morning. They said without your backing, the existing facility is under review." I said, "That is consistent with the terms of the arrangement." He said, "Saskia." His voice broke on the single syllable. "Why would you do this to us?" I said, "I didn't do anything to you. I stopped doing something for you." The line was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We need that backing. The spring refinancing depends on it." I said, "I know." He said, "Then why?" I said, "Dad, I sat in a garage last night." Silence. I said, "At your 40th anniversary party with 114 guests in a 6,000 square foot venue, you seated me in the converted garage with a folding table and a paper plate. You gave a speech about your family and you did not say my name." He said nothing. I said, "I have been quietly guaranteeing the financial stability of your company for 4 years. I have never asked for acknowledgement. I have never asked for credit. I have never required anything from you except the ordinary consideration you give to someone you consider family." I said, "Last night you showed me what category I'm actually in." He said, "It wasn't meant." I said, "Dad, I have to go to work." I ended the call. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in the specific quiet of a Sunday morning and I thought about 4 years of a financial arrangement that I had never described to anyone in detail and that was now going to become visible whether I wanted it to or not. I need to tell you how the arrangement began because the how of it matters for understanding everything that came after. 4 years earlier, my father's company had been in genuine trouble. Vance Interiors had expanded aggressively in the 2 years, following a large contract with a hotel development group. My father had hired 8 new employees, leased larger warehouse space, and committed to a level of operational overhead that made sense if the hotel group continued contracting at the projected rate. The hotel group did not continue contracting at the projected rate. A change in their development strategy pulled 3 of the projected contracts. The company's revenue dropped by 31% in 8 months. The overhead did not drop with it. My father had gone to the bank for a bridge facility. The bank had reviewed the company's financial position and had been willing to extend the facility, but had conditions. The conditions included a personal guarantee from a creditworthy individual with sufficient assets and professional standing to backstop the arrangement. My father called me on a Tuesday evening in November. He did not explain the situation in detail. He said the company was going through a transition and there was some paperwork he needed help with and could I come to the house on Saturday. I came on Saturday. My mother made lunch and the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table and my father explained what he needed. He said it was temporary. He said the company was turning around. He said Tristan was bringing in new clients and the pipeline looked strong. I asked to see the financials before I agreed to anything. My mother said, "We're family, Saskia." I said, "I know. That is why I want to see the financials. I want to understand what I am agreeing to support." My father brought the folder. I spent 2 hours with it at their kitchen table while they watched me with the particular quality of people who are hoping a number turns out differently than it is. The numbers were bad, not catastrophically bad. Recoverable bad with the right support and the right timeline. My father's instinct about the business was sound. His execution of the expansion had been overconfident but not incompetent. The core client relationships were intact. The operational model was viable. The gap was the bridge facility. Without it, the company could not make payroll through January. I said, "What does Tristan say about this?" My father said, "Tristan is working on the client side. He doesn't need to be involved in the financial details." My mother said, "We didn't want to worry him." I noted that Tristan, who had a title, a company car, and an expense account, and had been introduced to the company as its future, had been protected from the financial crisis while I had been brought in to solve it. I said, "What is the guarantee amount?" My father told me. I said, "And the term?" He said, 2 years with a renewal option. I said, "I will do it on one condition." My mother said, "Of course, whatever you need." I said, "I need the company's books cleaned up and a proper financial management system in place within 90 days. I will connect you with a bookkeeper I trust. The books need to be accurate and current before I will put my name on anything going to the bank." My father agreed. The bookkeeper I connected them with was a woman named Morwenna, who had worked with 2 of my consulting clients and was methodical and patient with business owners who had been managing their finances informally for too long. Morwenna cleaned up the books. I signed the guarantee. I never told Tristan. I never told Fenella. I never mentioned it at a family dinner or included it in any conversation about the company's recovery or pointed to it at any moment when the family was discussing the business's improving prospects over the following 3 years. I had not done it for credit. I had done it because it was the practical solution to a solvable problem, and because I did not want my father's company to collapse, and because that is who I was in this family, the reliable one, the infrastructure, the one who solved problems and received lunch. My phone rang continuously through the morning. Tristan called at 7:15. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I withdrew a financial guarantee." He said, "I didn't know there was a financial guarantee." I said, "I know." He said, "How long has this been in place?" I said, 4 years. Silence. He said, 4 years. I said, "Yes." He said, "And you never told anyone?" I said, "Your parents asked me not to. They said they didn't want to worry you." He said, "Saskia." I said, "Tristan, I need to ask you something." He said, "Okay." I said, "Last night at the party, did you know they were going to seat me in the garage?" A pause that had a different quality than the pause before it. Not the pause of someone processing new information, but the pause of someone deciding how much honesty the moment required. He said, "I didn't know the setup. I knew there might be a seating issue." I said, "A seating issue?" He said, "Mum mentioned there were more guests than originally planned and some people might need to be flexible." I said, "She told you I might need to be flexible." He said, "She didn't say you specifically." I said, "But when you came through the door and saw me at a folding table in a converted garage, you were not surprised." Another pause. He said, "No, I wasn't surprised." I said, "That is what I needed to know." I ended the call. I sat with that for a moment, not with anger exactly, but with the specific clarifying sensation of a thing that has been felt for a long time without being confirmed finally arriving at confirmation. Tristan had known, or had known enough, and had come through the door, and offered a perfunctory invitation to his table, and had accepted my refusal, and gone back to his seat. He had not pushed, because pushing would have required him to challenge an arrangement he benefited from. Fenella called at 20 minutes to 9. She said, "You're really doing this?" I said, "I sent an email, Fenella." She said, "You're destroying the company over a seating arrangement." I said, "I withdrew a financial guarantee I have been providing for 4 years. The company's difficulty with that is a consequence of being financially dependent on a guarantee they chose not to disclose or acknowledge." She said, "That's very clinical." I said, "I am a financial risk consultant." "Clinical is accurate." She said, "Mum is devastated." I said, "Mum seated me in a garage." She said, "You're going to hold that over them forever." I said, "Fenella, I am not holding anything over anyone. I made a business decision. The business will need to address the consequences of that decision through the available channels." That is not personal. That is just how financial arrangements work when they are no longer viable. She said, "It is absolutely personal." I said, "You're right." The garage was personal. The email was professional. They are not the same thing, and I am not going to pretend they are. She hung up. By 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, my phone had received 9 calls. My father twice more. My mother once, in a voice that had the quality of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and had found when they started saying it, that the rehearsal had prepared them for a different conversation than the one they were having. She said, "I want to explain about last night." I said, "I'm listening." She said, "The venue reached capacity, and we had to make some difficult decisions about seating." I said, "The venue holds 120 people. You had 114 guests." Silence. She said, "There were some unexpected additions." I said, "Which tables were added?" She said, "Some of your father's business contacts brought partners." I said, "So business contacts received table seats and I received the garage." She said, "It wasn't meant as a statement." I said, "What was it meant as?" She said, "It was just a practical arrangement." I said, "I understand." She said, "Then why?" I said, "Mum, I understand that it was a practical arrangement. I understand that when a practical arrangement needed to be made, I was the practical choice. I have always been the practical choice. I am the one who gets managed because I can be managed. I am the one who gets seated in the garage because she won't make a scene. I am the one who gets asked to sign financial guarantees because she will solve the problem quietly." I said, "I have been the practical choice for 36 years. She said, "We appreciate everything you do." I said, "I know you do in the way you appreciate good plumbing. You appreciate it most when it stops working." She said nothing. I said, "I will talk to you when you are ready to have an honest conversation." I ended the call. On Monday morning, I went to the office. My office was on the 7th floor of a building in Bristol that I had leased 2 years earlier when the consultancy outgrew the space I had been using since the beginning. 12 people worked there. The 2 partners I had brought on in the past 3 years were both exceptional. The client list included 4 mid-sized companies in active restructuring and 2 ongoing advisory relationships with companies that had come to us after successful restructuring work. I had built this from a secondhand desk. I sat at my actual desk on Monday morning and I opened my email and I found, in addition to the 43 family messages I had not responded to, 3 emails that had arrived since Saturday night from professional contacts. The first was from the bank's regional relationship manager. It was professional and measured and confirmed that my guarantee withdrawal notification had been received and was being processed according to the terms of the original arrangement. It noted that the company's facility review would be initiated within the standard timeline. It was not accusatory. It was just the bank doing what banks did when a financial backing structure changed. The second was from Morwenna, the bookkeeper I had connected with my parents 4 years earlier. She said she had seen the notification come through and wanted me to know that the books were current and clean and that she had documentation of every financial recommendation she had made over the 4 years she had been working with the company. She said she was available if I needed anything. I wrote back and thanked her. The third email was from a name I did not immediately recognize, a partner at a commercial property development firm whose name I placed after a moment as one of my father's long-term clients. The email said he had heard through professional channels that there might be a change in the financial structure of Vance Interiors and that he wanted to reach out directly because he had always found the company's work reliable and wanted to understand the situation before making any decisions about ongoing contracts. He had found out in less than 48 hours. That was the velocity of professional information in a mid-sized market when a financial structure changed at a company with a 14-year client history. I wrote back to the property developer. I said I appreciated his reaching out and that I was not in a position to speak to Vance Interior's internal financial arrangements, but that I had always found the company's work to be of high quality, and that any questions about their capacity to deliver on existing contracts should be directed to Alistair Vance directly. I kept the email professional. I kept it honest and I kept it brief because brevity in professional communication is its own form of respect for the intelligence of the person receiving it. By the end of Monday, 3 more clients had reached out through similar channels. By Tuesday, my father called again. This time he was not crying. He said, "I need you to tell me what it would take." I said, "To reinstate the guarantee?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "Saskia, the spring refinancing is in 11 weeks. I said, I know the timeline, Dad. I built the financial model that the refinancing is based on. He said, then you know what happens if the guarantee is not in place? I said, I do. He said, then tell me what you need. I looked at my desk, at the clean surface of a space I had built from nothing, and at the 7th floor window showing the Bristol skyline on a Tuesday morning in September. I said, I need time to think. He said, we don't have time. I said, then I suggest you start exploring your other options in parallel. A responsible business owner does not wait for one outcome when the timeline is constrained. He said, you're the only option. I said, Dad, that is the problem. I ended the call. I sat for a moment. Then I opened a new document on my laptop, not an email, but a memo, the kind I wrote for clients when I needed to organize the full picture of a situation before deciding what to recommend. At the top, I typed a single line: Vance Interiors, current position and available paths. I had not decided whether I was going to help them, but I had decided I was going to understand the full shape of the situation before I made any decision either way, because that was who I was, even now, even after the garage. The infrastructure, thinking about whether to hold up the house. The memo took 3 evenings to complete, not because the analysis was complicated, but because I was being honest with myself about what I was actually deciding, which was not a financial question, but a personal one, dressed in financial language. And honest decisions about personal questions require more time than financial calculations do. I had the numbers by the end of the first evening. The company's position was recoverable. The spring refinancing was viable with the right backing structure. The client relationships were intact. Morwena's books were clean. The operational model had stabilized over the 4 years since I had first signed the guarantee, which meant my father had done the work I had required of him as a condition of the original arrangement. The business was sound. The question was not whether I could help them. The question was whether I should. And underneath that question was a harder one, which was what helping them would mean about how I understood my own value and whether I was willing to continue being the infrastructure for a family that had demonstrated clearly and publicly, and in front of 114 witnesses, that they did not consider infrastructure worth seating at the table. I sat with that for 2 evenings. On the 3rd evening, I wrote the memo's conclusion. My father's accountant was a man named Gideon, who had been handling the company's tax filings for 9 years. I had met him twice during the original guarantee arrangement. He was 61 and methodical, and had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades in proximity to family businesses and had developed a complete absence of illusion about the gap between how family businesses describe themselves and how they actually Broctas and in a 20T operated. He called me on a Wednesday. He said, I want to be transparent with you. Alistair asked me to reach out. I said, I appreciate you saying that directly. He said, he thought I might have more success than he has had. I said, what did he ask you to say? He said, he asked me to explain the business's position and to ask whether there was any arrangement you would consider. I said, what is your own assessment of the position? A pause. He said, the company is viable. The operational changes over the past 4 years have been real and sustained. The guarantee withdrawal creates a refinancing challenge, but not an insurmountable one, provided something is resolved within 8 to 10 weeks. I said, what alternatives have you identified? He said, 3, a secondary guarantor through a business associate relationship, which Alistair has been pursuing without success, a restructured facility at a higher rate without a personal guarantee, which the bank has indicated is possible but costly, or a reinstatement of the existing arrangement. He said, the first option is not materializing. The second option is expensive but viable. The third option depends on you. I said, Gideon, off the record, what do you think I should do? He was quiet for a moment, then he said, I think you should do whatever allows you to sleep well. The business can survive the expensive option. It will cost them, but it will survive. He paused. I also think that whatever you decide, you should decide it on terms that are yours, not theirs. I said, that is useful. He said, one more thing. I said, go ahead. He said, I have been doing the audits and tax filings for 9 years. I knew about your guarantee from the beginning. I want you to know that I considered it professionally significant and personally admirable, and that I have never understood why it was not acknowledged more directly by the people who benefited from it. He said it without drama, just the fact. I said, thank you, Gideon. He said, Whatever you decide. I ended the call. I looked at the memo on my desk. I picked up a pen and I wrote 2 words at the bottom of the conclusion page. Conditional reinstatement. I called a meeting not a family dinner, but a meeting. I used that word deliberately when I called my father on Thursday morning and told him I was prepared to discuss the situation. He said, "Come to the house. Your mother will make lunch." I said, "I would like to meet at your accountant's office, Gideon's office, with Gideon present." A pause. He said, "Gideon?" I said, "He knows the books. He understands the arrangement. He is a neutral professional. I would like him in the room." My father agreed. The meeting was on a Friday afternoon. My parents arrived together, my father in the jacket he wore for important occasions, my mother in the dress she wore when she needed to appear composed rather than actually being composed. Gideon sat at the head of the table with the folder he had prepared. I sat across from my parents. I placed my memo on the table. I said, "I am prepared to discuss a conditional reinstatement of the personal guarantee. The conditions are mine. They are not negotiable. If they are acceptable, the arrangement continues. If they are not acceptable, the arrangement does not continue and the company pursues the alternative facility option Gideon has identified." My mother opened her mouth. I said, "Let me finish." She closed it. I said, "The conditions are 3. First, the guarantee arrangement is formally documented and disclosed to all family members who have a relationship with the business Tristan Fenella and in any future discussion of company finances. The arrangement is no longer private. It is acknowledged." My father looked at the table. I said, "Second, my role in the company's recovery is accurately described in any context where the company's history is discussed, not in promotional materials, not publicly unless relevant, but within the family and within professional relationships where the question of the company's recovery arises. The accurate description is that the recovery was supported by a personal financial guarantee provided by Saskia Vance over a 4-year period." My mother said, "That seems," I said. "Third condition." She stopped. I said, "There is no third financial condition. The third condition is personal. It is not enforceable, and I am not presenting it as a term of a legal agreement. I am presenting it as what I need to be willing to continue investing my professional standing in this family's financial stability." I looked at my parents. I said, "I need you to tell me directly, in this room, why I was seated in the garage." The room was quiet. Gideon was looking at his folder. My father looked at his hands. My mother looked at the center of the table for a long moment. Then she said, "We made a mistake." I said, "That is not what I asked." She said, "Saskia." I said, "I am not asking for an apology. I am asking for honesty. I have been the invisible child in this family for 36 years. I have been the one who solves problems, does not get mentioned in speeches, and sits in garages while the family photograph is taken in the garden. I am not asking you to feel guilty about it. I am asking you to say out loud what you actually believe about me, so that I know whether any arrangement we make here is built on something real." My mother pressed her hands flat on the table. She said, "We took you for granted." She said it quietly, without the performance that usually surrounded her difficult admissions. Just the sentence. She said, "We knew you would handle things. You always handled things. And we stopped thinking about what it cost you because you never told us what it cost you." I said, "You didn't ask." She said, "No." My father looked up. He said, "I should have said your name in that speech." He said it the way he had said almost nothing to me in 36 years, which was directly and without preparation the way he talked when he had run out of the managed version. He said, "I don't have a good reason for why I didn't. I just didn't." I looked at my father, 67 years old, the man who had built something from nothing and had been so invested in the story of what he had built that he had lost the habit of seeing who had helped him hold it together. I said, "Okay." I picked up the memo. I slid it across the table. I said, "Those are the conditions. Take the weekend. Tell me Monday." They called on Sunday afternoon. My father. He said they had discussed the conditions and they accepted all 3. I said, "I will have the documentation sent to Gideon by Wednesday." He said, "Thank you." I said, "Dad." He said, "Yes." I said, "I am doing this because the business is viable and because the people who work there did not seat me in a garage and do not deserve to pay for the decision of the people who did." He said, "I understand." I said, "I am not doing it to restore a relationship. The relationship is going to take longer than a Sunday phone call, he said. I know. I said, okay. I ended the call. The disclosure condition produced the outcome I had expected it to produce. Tristan found out the full extent of the arrangement on a Tuesday when my father sat him down with Gideon's documentation and walked him through 4 years of financial history he had been protected from. Tristan called me that evening. He said, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. He said, I should have. I said, yes. He said, I've been thinking about the party. I said, it's fine, Tristan. He said, it's not fine. I came through that door and I saw you sitting there, and I made an offer I knew you would refuse because refusing it was easier for me than actually fixing it. He said it with the honesty of someone who has examined something uncomfortable and decided to describe it accurately rather than manage it. I said, I appreciate you saying that. He said, I'm going to be better. I said, I know. He said, how do you know? I said, because you just told me the accurate version of something when the managed version was available. That is not nothing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the company, what you did for 4 years. I want you to know I understand what it meant. I said, thank you. He said, dinner sometime? I said, yes. Not at the house, somewhere with actual chairs. He laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from a family member in several weeks, and it landed with the lightness of something real. Fenella took longer. She called 6 weeks after the meeting at Gideon's office. She had been processing, which for Fenella meant defending, and then doubting, and then examining, and then arriving somewhere more honest than her first position. She said, I told you not to make it about yourself. I said, I remember. She said, it was about yourself. I said, it was about me, yes. She said, I should have come out to the garage and stayed. I said, you should have. She said, I didn't because it would have been uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be uncomfortable at Mom and Dad's party. I said, I know. She said, that's not a good enough reason. I said, no, it's not. She said, I'm sorry, Saskia. The apology arrived without architecture around it, just the words. I said, I know you are. The spring refinancing closed in March. The facility was restructured at a slightly higher rate than the original, reflecting the renegotiated terms, but the guarantee was in place and the bank was satisfied, and the company proceeded into the second quarter with the operational stability it had been building towards for 4 years. Gideon sent me a brief note confirming the close. He said, well handled throughout. I wrote back 2 words, thank you. 6 months after the anniversary party, I had a new office, not different from the one I had, but an additional space on the floor below, taken to accommodate the 2 new consultants I had hired in January, after the client list expanded past what the existing team could manage, at the quality level I required. The building had a courtyard visible from the conference room window. In the mornings, when the Bristol light came through at the angle it came through in early spring, the courtyard had the quality of a space that was both ordinary and considered. I had started keeping a coffee cup on the conference room windowsill, so I had a reason to stand there in the mornings before the day started. It was a small thing. It was mine. My mother called on a Saturday in April. She said she and my father wanted to have dinner. Not a party, not an occasion, just dinner. She said, at a restaurant, just us, no speeches. I said, okay. She said, and Saskia? I said, yes. She said, I'm going to keep trying to be better at this. I said, I know. She said, is that enough for now? I sat for a moment with the question. It was honest. It was not a performance or a managed admission or a strategic positioning. It was a 64-year-old woman asking her daughter whether trying was enough to start with. I said, for now, yes. Here is what happened. I was seated in my parents' garage at their anniversary party. I sent one email. My father called at 6 o'clock in the morning crying because the bank had contacted him. I had been quietly guaranteeing his company's financial stability for 4 years without acknowledgement. I met with my parents and their accountant and offered conditional reinstatement. The conditions were disclosure, accurate attribution, and honesty. They accepted. The refinancing closed. Tristan found out and called me. Fenella found out and called me 6 weeks later. The business stabilized. I kept my office. I took on 2 new consultants. My mother called in April and asked if trying was enough to start with. I said yes. That is the whole story. Now, here is what I want to leave with you. Being reliable is not the same as being valued. I had been the reliable one for 36 years. I had solved problems quietly. I had signed documents that protected people who did not think to protect me. I had been the infrastructure of a family that had mistaken my willingness to be useful for an absence of needs. The garage was the moment that made the invisible arrangement visible. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was finally willing to let the consequences of the arrangement fall on the people who had created it, rather than absorbing them myself. That is the difference between enabling and loving. Enabling removes consequences from the people who created them. Loving sometimes means letting consequences land. The second thing, the email I sent was professional and polite and took 40 seconds to execute. 4 years of financial commitment, one email. The gap between those two things is not the point. The point is that I had been waiting for the right moment for a long time, and I had been wrong about what the right moment required. It did not require a confrontation. It did not require a speech. It required one decision made from clarity, rather than from the accumulated weight of everything I'd been absorbing. Make the decision from clarity. The rest takes care of itself. Tell me in the comments your first name and your city. Tell me if you have ever been the infrastructure. Tell me if you were ever the person who held something together while the room celebrated everyone else. For more stories like this one, come find us on the channel. Every story here is about someone who was placed at the folding table and eventually set their own. Subscribe and stay. The next story starts the way all the honest ones do, with someone being told the house is full right before they discover what they were holding up.